Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. George Russell has revealed his honest opinion on the new set of Formula 1 regulations, stating that the increase in weight in search of safety is actually achieving the opposite effect and could even be more concerning for drivers now and in the future. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, some other drama to discuss on the prospect of a new Formula 1 team. This of course came out the other day with Cadillac and Andretti teaming up and partnering to make an entry into the F1 World Championship with those expressions of interest process now available. Now, of course, the FIA, the governing body, has to agree. The Formula 1 management group has to agree, as do the teams. So this is far from a done deal at this point. And over the last few days, a lot of the community and the fans have been kind of down for this 11th team because we've wanted for some time another team on the grid, more drivers to be there again. And of course, financially, it's certainly able to happen, right? Back in the day, these teams were struggling to survive. Nowadays, there's so many teams that want to get in and, well, they're being stopped from entering. Now, from the FIA's point of view, more teams, I guess, equals more eyes, equals more money, all this type of stuff. So they want it to happen hands down. Now, Ben Sulayem, right, the president, actually comes out with this statement today. It is surprising that there has been some adverse reaction to the Cadillac and Andretti news. The FIA has accepted the entries of smaller, successful organizations in recent years. We should be encouraging prospective F1 entries from global manufacturers like General Motors and thoroughbred racers like Andretti and others. Interest from teams in growth markets adds diversity and broadens F1's appeal. Now, look, I actually agree with Mohammed Ben Sulayem on this, right? To the surprise maybe of some of you guys. Like, I actually think he's on the money. And I think in general, this adverse reaction has not been from the fans, but rather from, you know, the teams themselves, right? The F1 teams don't seem so keen on having another team on the grid, and you can understand why. I just think the process isn't great here because the FIA wants it. Formula 1 management, we don't really know. They haven't been so keen. It's not like all the teams came out and said, oh yeah, fantastic, get them on the grid. Can't wait to have the 11th team happen. Like, they don't really say anything, don't seem particularly keen, and there's no, okay, there's a process here, but there's no clear, okay, tick all the boxes and you're in. Like, it's super subjective, and just the idea that the president of the FIA is doing a statement like this on Twitter to try and say, oh, come on guys, like, you know, let's get them in, doesn't strike me that he feels like the FIA are in a massive position of power to support this motion. So yeah, intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments section below, and as Chris Medlin goes on to say, just a further example of this power struggle between the FIA, the governing body, and Formula 1 when it comes to new teams. Only last week, Formula 1 was stating, you know what, any new entrant request requires the agreement of both Formula 1 and the FIA, of course, the teams included in that. So, you know, it's just one further example over the last couple of years, really, of Formula 1 and the FIA, the governing body, not getting on so well. And this is one more example of, you know, this power struggle continuing. I think it would be good for the fans if there was another team in, but I don't know if that is going to happen at all. Let's talk George Russell and Mercedes. The last few days has been some talks about their 2023 car. Is it going to be any good? Russell, Hamilton think that's going to be the case. We looked at some upgrades they're bringing in yesterday. But one of the key points now, which is very noticeable indeed, is that the cars nowadays are massive. They're super long. They're like 4 meters long, you know, really wide as well. Tough to race on certain circuits. Some corners you just can't fit too wide like you used to be able to in the past. And also, they're very heavy. 798 kilograms, pretty much. That is what the minimum weight limit is. But when you start a race with full kind of fuel capacity, you're up to nearly 900 kilograms. That's seriously heavy for an F1 car, certainly compared to what it was even a decade ago. We'll see that here in a second. Now, George Russell believes, I'm not exactly sure the physics check out on this, but, you know, I'll see what he says. We'll discuss it and you guys can give your thoughts in the comments below. But he actually believes that getting the car to be too heavy is getting to the point of being on the edge of safety. Now, in fairness, a lot of the increase in weight that we see is due to the extra safety requirements nowadays. The way, you know, the crash test resistance has to work, the way the halo is, the other kind of safety features that mean that nowadays drivers can walk away from crashes that 20 years ago they might have been in hospital for at the very least. So, you know, I definitely think they've made phenomenal strides and we should definitely applaud that. And, you know, Russell says there's a lot of positives to take from this regulation change. Of course, you know, the way they've moved things nowadays with the way the aero works and easier to follow. The racing was better this past season than it has been in years prior. So that was some positives, but he does reckon the weight is worse. Now, the drivers never like a car that's too heavy. It is generally pretty awful to drive in the slower corners, and the drivers agree, and also as fans, I think you can see that the new regulations, the cars are just so understeery, they're so cumbersome, like the drivers turn into a corner, it doesn't really work. I mean, at slower speeds, they've got less downforce, right? So the car just isn't nimble anymore. It just looks super clumsy, I think, through a lot of the slower corners nowadays. And, you know, as Russell goes on to say, the weight is extraordinary at the moment. The load speed performance performance is not great. Now, that may improve over time, but it's going to take until at least 2026 when the new regulations happen again, where finally we might see the weight start coming down, kind of like with smartphones in a way. They got bigger and bigger and bigger, and at some point they had to kind of stop. And it may be at that point here with Formula 1, and they can't keep adding weight onto the car. Now, of course, a lot of the reason why this weight has been added on over the last few years is for safety. You know, crashing, the impact protection, all this type of stuff is better safety-wise. But he actually raises quite an interesting point, that with a heavier car, you get a greater impact in terms of pure force, right? So if you're looking at F equals ma, Newton's second law, you've got, you know, let's say the deceleration, you're going from 150 miles an hour to 0 in, a relatively short period of time. But now the mass of your car is 50% greater than it was 15 years ago, then the force required to do that is 50% greater than it was 15 years ago. So, you know, the impact in terms of force is greater nowadays for these crashes than it has been before. Then again, the safety is much better, so is that really a concern? But also, you know, does it mean that there's more force going through the driver's body? Like, it's an interesting comparison. He says it's like crashing a bus compared to crashing a smart car. So I guess his point is that crashing a bus, because, you know, the bus has more momentum, the impact of a bus into a wall is much more powerful than the impact of a smart car. But at the same time, the impact of a bus, let's say you're a passenger on a bus, like there's so much in front of you, you're not going to get, you know, going to die for the impact, right, if you got your seatbelt on. Whereas a smart car, if you crash that into a wall, you know, there's no protection, you're probably going to have had it. So I don't really think that's what he was getting at, but it's kind of, you know, it kind of counters his point in a way that, okay, there's a reason why, yes, crashing a bus into a wall at the same speed and acceleration or deceleration in this case is a more powerful impact, but it's also a safer impact for the driver. So, you know, I think he raised an interesting point though. At the end of the day, the cars being so heavy, and especially 900 kilograms pretty much at the start of the race, with all the fuel load in them now, is significantly heavier than arguably they should be, and makes them difficult to handle at the start of races. And when impacts do occur, it means that the forces exerted on the car are greater than they would be before. Whether that gets transferred into the driver with all the safety measures, not necessarily, but it's still quite an interesting point. And he reckons that, you know, they've got to strike the right balance, because if the car was like 2 tons, then all of a sudden I guess this issue is exacerbated more. You can imagine a 2-ton car goes off the track, you know, it can't be controlled, it's going to slam into the wall, there's going to be a big impact there. It's understandable the drivers are going to try and avoid that, and as he says, if you keep making the cars heavier, stronger, actually you get to a point where the line is too heavy, the car is too heavy, you cross the line and it's actually not safe anymore, which is a fair point. Whether they've reached that yet, I don't know, but at least he's raising the argument. So, you know, as he says, it's like crashing with a bus compared to a smart car, which might not be the best comparison, but I think we see what he means. And at the end of the day, I think he's got a good point. These are the weights of the cars over the last several years. Back in, you know, let's say pre-2008, we're looking at 600 kilograms. Even a few years ago here, 620 kg, 650 kg. In 2021, they were up to about 650. And this year, they've added another set of weight on again, largely safety concerns, stuff like that, for understandable reasons. But yeah, still, this isn't really a great trend. And of course, here you can't really see the lengths of the cars, but that to me is one of the more important factors. This is one of the newer Ferraris compared to a Ferrari from about, you know, 15, 20 years ago. This is how much longer the cars are today, how much wider the cars are today. Here's some other examples, right? I'm not sure this is quite to scale, but I mean, it looks pretty much to scale, to be fair, with the cars of, let's just say, 30 years ago compared to today. Now, safety-wise, obviously, today is way better, but for racing and other factors, it's a key point. And I know that the regulations, I'm pretty sure they have said that the next set of regulations they do on the aero side and the way the car is designed, they are going to try and make the cars lighter, more nimble, more agile. And I think it does add to the excitement factor to some degree. Even looking back at 2008 and the way the drivers were able to drive the cars, and like even I'm sure you guys know some of the famous moments from, well, plenty from that season, but you know, when Hamilton was kind of like drifting the car through the Monaco S's, the swimming pool section, you can't really do that nowadays. The cars when they were lighter were just different and probably more exciting to watch than they are now. So I think that Russell maybe has a fair point, but you know, in my opinion, the reason why the cars should not take a step back, of course, but be changed in their design is not necessarily safety-wise, because I think that probably they are safer nowadays, and we want to maintain that level of safety for sure when we hopefully start making the cars smaller. But if you look at this comparison from 1950 to the present day, see how much bigger these 2020 and 2021 cars, 22 of course now, 23, are than they were several years ago. And I think that some sort of step backwards here in terms of length and width and weight is necessary, as long as they can maintain the safety advantages that they have nowadays. But they certainly can't go any further. Like, there's no way they can add on more weight here, and Russell is trying to make whatever point he's trying to make to ensure they don't do exactly that. that. One quick thing to mention for you guys before we close out the video here. Fred Vasseur has been at it again because, of course, he's the new Ferrari boss, talking about the Red Bull controversy, stating that quicker and stricter action needs to be taken because, of course, many, well, teams, maybe understandably, were not at all happy with all the drama that was going on with the Red Bull cost cap breach. And every team apart from Red Bull has this opinion that, for me, 2 or 3 million, which is kind of what the breach was, it's not minor, it is mega for developmental purposes. And he says, in future, forget about minor and major breaches, just be more strict on the decision. I think he does make a fair point here because it's kind of like if you're over 5 million above, or if you're over 5% above or something, that's a minor breach. But you could spend 7 million over and be in minor breach. And so, you know, it feels a little bit, that's kind of a significant deal in terms of overspending. And above that becomes a major breach, at which point they might take away your championship, is kind of the argument there. But yeah, maybe the idea is in future, if it does occur again, as I think even Red Bull have implied it might occur again, they should just forget about minor and major and just say if you are over by this amount, it's this punishment, and have that clearly outlined. But, you know, FIA, Formula One, and consistent rulings don't seem to go particularly well together. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.